How's it going, everybody? It's Wardy here. It's May 14th, 2025, and the New York Metropolitans just secured their latest series victory, this time in what was another tight ball game against the Pittsburgh Pirates, winning by a final score of 2-1. So in case you guys didn't check out our coverage from this past night, as we broke down all of our initial reactions, key takeaways, innings 1 through 9, and everything in between, please make sure to do so after watching this one, because today we're going to further expand on some of those key player takeaways, specifically on Brett Baty and how this man has went from looking a guy that is so far removed from being an MLB type player with the bat's ball skills to begin the season to now looking like a guy that needs to be in this lineup every single day. We're going to expand plenty on Baty, as we're also going to talk a lot on the prospect front, as we have a very special guest that you guys will see shortly into this video here, that we're going to highlight what is going right for guys in McLean and Felipe Cruz there in Syracuse, some key standouts outside of himself, along with a little bit of a preview for the Subway Series matchup. I understand that, yes, the Pirates series is not done for some of you guys watching this video, but we're really excited to see what's going to happen this weekend between the Mets and the Yankees. So a lot to get into, short period of time to do so. So thank you guys kindly for smashing like and subscribe on as you first chime in, and let me know all your initial reactions in the comments down below to the following topics. And shout out as always to our amazing sponsors here at SeatGeek that has you covered all your ticketing needs. So make sure you utilize our promo code link down below at WardyNYM. That way you too get 10% off your next ticket purchase. And also shout out to our amazing friends here at BetUS that have you covered with all of your sports betting needs. Of course, make sure you guys bet responsibly should you guys have interest. That's the most important thing. But if you do so, head over to betus.com.pa today and utilize our promo code YouTube150. That way YouTube will get 150% bonus on your first deposit, 125 on your second and your third, up to $2,000 for whatever you guys want to bet on. And we know the Luis Robert rumors have been kickstarted over the past couple of days that we broke down the platform. Make sure to check it out in case you guys haven't already. But as you guys can see here, could he potentially be the missing piece to a World Series run? Now, I understand that Robert is not batting too well so far this season, but there is reason as to why David Stearns is seeking him, as we broke down thoroughly a couple days ago. And look at this plus 900 odds if that is in fact going to happen for them to be a World Series winner right now. Do you like those odds? Do you disagree with those odds? Whatever your thoughts are, if you are interested, especially in the bias bet front, check out our awesome friends here at BetUS today. Thank you guys so much for doing exactly that. Now let's get into it, and let's first start this discussion not on the prospect front, but let's talk solely on a player that has taken the Mets by storm the past week plus, and that is a man that was thankfully called up not because of necessarily how he performed, but rather Jesse Winker going down with that unfortunate grade 2 oblique strain. It has really paved the way for a guy, and yes, Brett Baty, to try to run away with a position now with the Mets. And it does appear, at least throughout the first number of games that's being called up, he is stepping up and then some. And he's looking more like the Brett Bonds Baty, as I love to jokingly call him, that we see in spring training and certainly there in Syracuse. Because just take a look at this, everybody. Over the past 7 games that Brett Baty has played, not only does he have 5 home runs, but he has 9 RBIs, a 368 batting average, and over 1,000 slug for a 1,526 total OPS. And as you guys see from the highlights right here, Brett Baty has been tearing the cover off of baseballs. And my favorite aspect to it all is a spreading for all fields. Baty has tremendous opposite field power, I think more than he even maybe realized that we've seen over the past number of days, because he has 4 home runs on this Mets-Lays homestand alone. So if there's people that you want to thank for the offensive production leading to the Mets and having another strong homestand, winning back-to-back series against the Cubs and the Pirates, there are many guys that we can nitpick, of course, in this lineup, but one that has certainly stood out more than a lot of others, if not entirely out of the others, is Mr. Brett Baty. Now, what do we know about Brett Baty so far? His defense at second and third base has been far from a problem. He has been one of the best infield defensive options the Mets have, along with Francisco Lindor, even though Lindor just can't stop catching errors the past couple days, and I'm still baffled as to how that's happening, but that's a discussion for another day. We're here to lock in on Brett Baty, and Baty has shown his defensive upside, and that Baty defensive upside is playing so well into his hand and so greatly in Carlos Mendoza's hand, as I've reiterated plenty over the past couple days, but just to reaffirm it once more, it gives the Mets an abundance of options to choose from. By having Baty play strong defense and at least average with the offense, and he's playing well above average with the offense right now that we see over this little sample size at the moment. 5 home runs over his past 7 games is just simply unheard of. But Brett Baty is here, baby. He's finally breaking out. And having the bat's ball skills to back up the defense is now paving the way for Carlos Mendoza to have a great problem on his hands. Because what does this mean? What it means is the Mets don't need to be overly reliant on having Mark Vientos guaranteed to start at third base every single game. Now that Vientos unfortunately has had more defensive issues while the bat's been hot. Vientos is batting .300 over his past 20 plus games. He has not been a liability there. Defensively, that's a different discussion, and that goes without saying. So, how can the Mets find a happy medium that we talked about over the past couple days, where both Baty and Vientos thrive with this team for the time being with their roster configuration? That is by getting creative, as Mendoza has done plenty already, and that's by shifting Baty back to third base, putting Vientos at DH and or coming off the bench, Acuna back at second base, and McLean either again in the outfield or DH based on pitching matchup and configuration. The Mets are in a great spot when you look at the depth of their offense and overall their playability with guys in the infield and the outfield. Even with Jose Siri ramping up back from injury, the Mets are not looking like a team that's in desperate need for another center field option, which is why if they do in fact trade for Luis Robert that we discussed separately a couple days ago, it will be fascinating to see how that all balances and plays out. But for Brett Baty, blossoming defensively has now set himself up to start to thrive offensively with the opportunities given him, because he's guaranteed given opportunity as the best third base option right now that the Mets have in-house defensively. Offensively, he's now performing so unbelievably good that if you're Carlos Mendoza, you can't take this guy's bat out of the library now until Brett Baty fully cools off, or he's just not hitting lick again, which I don't wish, and I hope it doesn't happen at any point this season. But if he does really come off a cliff here, and not necessarily just back to reality, but well below reality, where he's performing below league average as a batter, then we have a different discussion. But for the time being, Brett Baty now has set himself up so well and so brilliantly for the Mets and Carlos Mendoza that they don't, again, need to be overly reliant on having the best bat first option in the infield while sacrificing the defense at the same time. If there was one positive to come out of Jesse Winker getting injured, and it's hard to say that there are much, because as a Jesse Winker lover that I am, I know how electric he is for this team and how much he has a flash, a flair for the dramatic, if you will, with his offensive upside. But knowing that he's going to be out for a number of weeks really sets up greatly for Brett Baty to run away with this thing and to finally establish himself as a true everyday MLB player. And if he can do that, then you look at the Mets and you say to yourself, oh, wow, we have a true third base option. We have a true DH option that can mainly DH there. And if the Mets do, in fact, give Vientos more reps in DH, which I'd anticipate, I will be honestly pretty surprised if Brett Baty's not starting at third base with Vientos either off the bench or at DH for the series finale against the Pirates. So you guys can let me know after the fact, if you're watching this video after the game transpired or by the time the labs came out, to let me know if I was right or not, because that feels like that's the route that the Mets are going to go more down. Obviously, after seeing the defensive blunder they just had this past night especially, it just makes endless sense to maximize the ability of Brett Baty. And if there's one thing left for Brett Baty to do with this playing time right now, it's to start to face more left-handed pitching. That's the one thing that Carlos Mendoza has shied a bit more away from. Not that Baty hasn't had at-bats against left-handers this year, because he has. They're just very few and far in between. And in order for Baty to truly establish himself as an everyday Major League Baseball player, he needs to make sure that he's seen all kinds of pitching. And we can't limit him to facing just right-handers, because then there will be spots where you will need him there against the lefty more than likely, where he does make sense as the more favorable matchup. And if he's outmatched, we have ourselves to blame because we weren't giving him the proper reps to truly blossom in that position, to really maximize his potential. So what the Mets still need to do, I expect them to do that. It's a matter of when, not if. But needless to say, Brett Baty's off to a tremendous run right now with the Mets over the past week plus of games. Whether he can continue this torrid pace has yet to be seen, but what we know at minimum is that Baty is a very reliable defensive option for the Mets at second, third base, and that alone is going to get him fairly consistent playing time, whether it's over Acuna, McLean at second, and the others going to say third base, Vientos at third, or DH. There are just various ways that Carlos Mendoza can go about this thing, maximizing the ability of all these players. And even if you bring Baty in as a late defensive replacement, a late game pinch hitter, a late game pinch runner, I do have confidence that he can go out there and hopefully make something happen, because it's clear that what we've seen over the past number of games is not a fluke. Brett Baty has the stuff. We're finally seeing that raw talent, that raw power really start to blossom into potentially something really special for this New York Metropolitan team. But Mets fans, definitely let me know all your thoughts on the Brett Baty front in the comments down below, because let's go from talking about Brett Baty to talking about the farm. Because before we get into our awesome interview just in the next couple minutes, let me leave you guys with the following, which is what transpired from Port St. Lucie all the way up to the Syracuse Mets this past night in baseball. And starting in St. Lucie, we saw they dropped their latest game there. 11-9 was the final score. And offensively, the standouts were Davison Gutierrez, a Venezuelan catching prospect who I like quite a bit. He started off the season red hot, then cooled off a lot, and since then he's starting to pick it up. His second home run of the season, Colin Houck also had himself a home run, his fourth of the year, and that's more encouraging than anything else. Colin Houck, Mets first-round draft pick 2 years ago under Billy Epler, 4 RBI game, 221 average, but 763 OPS. That's a major step in the right direction for Houck, who could not hit a lick in his first year of pros whatsoever last year with these same St. Lucie Mets. Davison Gutierrez is batting just a $165, but I do have confidence there. He's just really kind of fallen off a cliff after having a red-hot first week or two of the season. And on the pitching end, if there's any notables I'll get into, not really. So let's get into now what's happening for the Brooklyn Cyclones. Because as we see everybody with the Brooklyn Cyclones, we have something cooking. They won 7-2. They are now 21-12 on the season. And the Cyclones just have a lot of really exciting pieces that if you have a chance to watch a Brooklyn Cyclones game, you should really watch a Brooklyn Cyclones game. And I do think that they're going to have a game broadcasted too, maybe as soon as this Friday, but I could be wrong. What we see on the notables is Ewing, who's been called up the past week and a half, 2 weeks there, from St. Lucie to the Cyclones. He's batting greatly, 1 for 4 with an RBI thanks to his 4th double. We saw Eli Serrano with a double, his 9th of the season, 1 for 2 with a run scored, 2 RBIs, 3 walks. Great day at the plate for Eli Serrano, batting leadoff. He's starting to heat it up again in left field. 266 average and a 908 OPS. Ewing, 298 average, 854 OPS. Carson Benj with his 2nd triple of the season. Benj has been on a heater as well. Mets first-round draft pick last year out of OSU. In center field, commanding where he can play all over the outfield. 1 for 2 with a run score, 2 RBIs and a walk. 299 average, 883 OPS. Jacob Reimer continues to look fantastic there at third base, all around the infield. 1 for 3 with 2 runs scored and a walk. 333 average, over 1,000 OPS. Reimer feels like a guy that it might not be long. Him and Benj alike that are going to get the call soon to eventually the Rella Ponies. Just a matter of when. Jesus Baez, one of the hardest hitters in the Mets minor leagues. 2 for 4 game with a run scored and an RBI. 216 average, 623 OPS. Boston Barrow, who's been moved down the order because he's had an underwhelming start this year there after looking really solid last year as more of a guy towards the top of the lineup. At shortstop, 1 for 3 with a run scored. Suero, 1 for 4, who I love a lot as a catching / first base prospect, Bronx native. For Mr. Suero, 245 average, 877 OPS. And on the pitching end, let's look if there's any notables here in this matchup. And Gurdon went 5 innings of 1 earned run, 2 walk, 9 strikeout ball. Love to see that. 3.75 ERA. And the most notable thing for me on the pitching end here is Ryan Ammons, my dog, Southpaw, who had himself a 2.18 ERA last year in the minor leagues and 45-plus innings that we saw in multiple leagues in the minor leagues last year. Now, this year so far has yet to allow a run 8 innings into the season. Ammons will be moved up very soon because he, in my opinion, is one of the best true lefty reliever options the Mets currently have in their organization outside of the big league glove. I love Ammons. I love how he plays. I've been gassing this kid up since the start of last season, since we started to do prospect breakdowns, basically, and he's a guy that I fully anticipate to be with the Rummel Ponies sooner rather than later. And speaking of the Rummel Ponies, everybody, let's talk about their game because they unfortunately lost 1-0 to Hartford in this one, so not a lot to get into, but pitching-wise, we saw Thornton have himself a day. Thornton, for those that don't know, has only pitched 1 start or so with the Rummel Ponies since he was moved up from the Cyclones. Very exciting southpaw prospect of a starter for the Mets, and he went 7 shutty in this one. 3 hits, 0 earned runs, 0 walks, 6 strikeouts for a 3.86 ERA. Disgustingly good. Love to see that. We also saw Ross have himself a scoreless inning there in relief, Dylan Ross, and that's great to see. Dylan Ross, mind you, just made his debut for the Rummel Ponies because he was just moved up, literally. And not only did Dylan Ross just make his debut and look really, really good there, another guy just looked really, really good. And Anthony Nunez, as he was just moved up as well. And literally a day after they're both moved up, they're utilized in the bullpen right away, and they both have themselves scoreless innings. Guzman had himself a scoreless inning, too. He allowed a 1 unearned run. He's down to 2.35 on the ERA in the season, but really, really good stuff. And offensively, the only guy that had a hit in this game, funny enough, was Nick Morabito at center field, looking solid. So now let's get on to the Syracuse Mets. And the Syracuse Mets lost to the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs by a final score of 7-3. And the notables were Drew Gilbert ripping his 4th double of the season there for Syracuse. Jared Young hit his 2nd home run of the year there that we saw. Young, 2 for 5 with 2 RBIs, 264 average, over 1,000 OPS, batting leadoff in right field. Young is most notably known for playing as a backup first base option in the infield than anything else, I would say. Gilbert bagging second, 2 hits, 254 average, 783 OPS, and 2 walks. John Singleton, 1 for 4 with an RBI, 224 average, 813 OPS. Joey Meneses went 0 for. Donovan Walton went 0 for in this one. De Los Santos at third base went 1 for 4. Hayden Sanger went 1 for 4. Billy Mack went 0 for. And on the pitching end, we saw Brandon Waddell have himself another strong day. The defense didn't help him because Brandon Waddell gave up 3 unearned runs, but he went 4 shutty otherwise and had himself 1 walk, 2 strikeouts, and is now down to a 1.42 ERA. Brandon Waddell, who looked awesome for the Mets when they called him up in a bulk setting not too long ago where he went 4 strong innings. Don't be surprised where he gets called up by the Mets again at some point this season. Rico Garcia looked very good. 2 strikeouts in a scoreless outing on the bullpen front, 4 ERA. Dominic Campbell utilized as a reliever, and I like that because I don't see Dominic Campbell blossoming as a starter if he's going to last in this organization. 1.2 innings, did allow an earned run, but he's starting to get adjusted now in a reliever role. So we'll see what happens there. Colin Poche did give up 2 earned runs, which I don't love to see as the Mets signed him recently there from the Washington Nationals. Poche, I think, is really going to be a southpaw option for this Mets bullpen at some point this season, just a matter of when and not so much if. Ty Adcock went 2 innings of 1 earned run ball, 1.54 ERA on the season. But folks, that does it for the prospect breakdown. So without further ado, let's get into our very special segment. Alrighty, folks, we're back at it with our latest Big Mets update segment with our awesome friend here, Samantha Croston. You might know her as the co-host of Why Am I a Mets Fan podcast, or her great work that she does there as a local sports director there in Syracuse. And today, we're going to talk a bit more about the Syracuse Mets, as there's been some really good pitching performances going on there. We're also going to wrap up the show talking a bit about the Subway Series, even though it's not here yet, as we're recording this actively during the Pirates series. We all know that the Pirates versus the Mets versus the Yankees is apples and oranges in the intensity and our excitement as fans. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Samantha, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Kind of was funny. You and I were actually at the same Mets game, which hasn't happened so far this season.
Right. And thankfully the boys won too. That was the big takeaway, right? You know, especially
Yes.
on an early day game after a night game, you don't know how the bats are going to show up, especially early in the season. But to have that big 4-run 8th inning the way that they did to kind of comfortably secure that series against a good Cubs team, mind you, that many thought were going to be far and away the biggest test yet this season. And I got to be honest, you know, I didn't feel like the Mets were all that tested throughout those 3 games. It felt like another fairly easygoing start to a homestand for the Amazons. Wouldn't you agree?
Can I tell you something messed up just because we're here?
Of course.
I had to take a flight back to Syracuse that day because I was working that night. And I left for the airport, I believe, in the bottom of the 7th inning. So legitimately, I missed the entire 8th inning. And I was listening on the radio, of course, to Howie Rose. And my dad was looking at me so disappointed. He's like, why do we have to leave just now? And I understood. I can't blame him.
Yeah, and listen, that's one of those things where when you got a flight to catch after arriving to a game last minute, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? Hey, I have an even better story for you. Specifically, there are 2 that come to mind real quick. Because one, against the Philadelphia Phillies a couple years ago, I had left the game prematurely, and this was pre-Wardy Tyler, mind you. So this was right before we got engulfed with, you know, covering the Mets and everything, just a diehard sicko of a fan. And I leave early because the Mets are down, I think, 4 heading into the 9th inning when the offense was lifeless all day. What happens? We see multiple home runs, 3 consecutive home runs in a row, as a matter of fact, where the Mets get this close to rallying all the way back. They still lose. So I was like, okay, I'm not happy they lost, but I'm also like happy that I didn't miss out on an entire comeback. And then the Tampa Bay Rays, a couple years ago, I was in attendance, but it was a cold, frigid night. So I ended up leaving early. And as I was watching on my phone, because I was trying to initially beat traffic, but I had a hiccup from that happening, we saw the Mets rally back late in that game and actually win it. It was a dramatic win a couple years ago, too, when everything else was going wrong. So, yeah, don't leave games early unless you absolutely have to, but you get the pass because you literally had to for a flight. So don't blame you. So let's get right into why you had to fly back to Syracuse, and that's to talk about things like the Syracuse Mets, right? So I think a perfect way to kickstart this conversation is to get into what's happening there in the farm, specifically on the pitching end, because we just saw over the past couple days, Noel McLean was anointed Player of the Week for the Syracuse Mets after going 7 shutty in his Syracuse Mets debut. Now, I have been unbelievably positive on the McLean front, really going back to last season because he's skyrocketing the farm. And I would love to hear your thoughts on Nolan and what has really separated himself from maybe any other pitching prospect to this point here in 2025.
Yeah, to your point, one of the top prospects in the Mets organization. I actually think the Baseball America rankings just moved him ahead of Sproat, making him the Mets #2 overall prospect behind Jet Williams and the top pitching prospect. So that says something. Drafted a few years ago, started the season in Binghamton, pitched really well there. And you mentioned it, first Syracuse start was this past week in Jacksonville, 7 scoreless. Mind you, there were 7 hits. But I really don't think that mattered all that much. And truthfully, I think that he's somebody who you need to look out for. Again, that's nothing to take away from Sproat and the success that he's been having. But as we've discussed in the past, at the AAA level, you never really know. It's hard to tell, sometimes who's going to end up coming out on top or being somebody amazing in the major leagues. And I think he's somebody who has a lot of upside and a lot of potential. So obviously one start doesn't show you everything, but to be able to go out there in his first Syracuse start and pitch 7 scoreless innings, no matter how you slice it, no matter how many hits there were, that's something that I find to be really impressive.
Very much so, especially when, we talked about this in previous segments together so far this season, how it feels like every time a top pitching prospect gets to Syracuse, they just don't perform the way that they have otherwise up until that point, at least consistently, and that's why we're not only going to talk about McLean, but also Felipe de la Cruz, because he falls in a similar category of a guy that just burst on the scene as soon as he was called up to Syracuse this year. And I'm loving the aggressiveness by David Stearns, because this is not something that we saw under previous front office regimes, and certainly not under the Wilpons at all, where we were kind of skyrocketing kids from St. Lucie to Brooklyn to Binghamton to Syracuse, and now we're doing that fairly consistently because Stearns and the player development staff are clearly seeing the upside in these guys and are like, okay, if you have the stuff to play, we're going to move you up and see how you're going to fare there. And if you don't fare there, well, then we'll move you back down, or we'll just keep you there for a bit longer. So I'm loving the philosophy. And McLean, who has that entire 6-pitch mix he's working with, headlined by the sinker and the slider and the sweeper. The main thing that I love about McLean, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is the following. He has 2 different types of sliders, essentially, right? He has more of that hard slider that is going to be faster, but not have as much horizontal break. Then you have the sweeper that's, say, 4 to 5 miles per hour slower, but it gets some nasty break and late movement, in similarity to, I think, of a guy like Adam Ottavino right away. When you see those right-handers that just go completely across their body, that make every right-handed batter look like Javi Baez swinging down and away, where it's just nowhere close to the zone. That's the vibes I get with someone like McLean. So, in your opinion, do you think that the stuff that he has right now could actually play up at the MLB level?
I think it's possible. You mentioned the sweeper. I've told you that I, frequently talk to the Syracuse Mets play-by-play broadcasters. I would venture to guess that they also think that the stuff he has right now could play in a major league setting. Would it? Again, it's hard to say because, like you mentioned, from even AA to AAA, sometimes, their stuff is not necessarily what you were anticipating for it to be. I would also say that I think from the AAA level to Major League Baseball, the gap is much wider even. So I guess my honest answer to you would be it's too soon to tell. But I think if we continue to have this conversation a month from now or 2 months from now, I can see the kind of consistency in the numbers that McLean is putting up. It'd be easier for me to answer that question.
Noted. Well, let's get into now the next pitcher that I want to talk about briefly, and that's Felipe de la Cruz, because this was a guy that wasn't even a heralded prospect heading into the season, and then we see, oh, he's dominating with the Rummel Ponies. Oh, he gets called up to Syracuse, and then he dominates in his first start in Syracuse. He's also been utilized as a reliever. David Stearns clearly likes the stuff, the makeup that we have here in de la Cruz. So what's your thoughts about him?
So as far as De La Cruz, I think he's sort of that under the radar guy, right? He's not one of the names that most people have heard of, unless you're more of that like freak fan, and I say that in a positive way. Syracuse Mets needed a starter 2 weeks ago. Binghamton sent them a bunch of guys. So he made his debut 2 weeks ago, pitched 6 shutout innings, struck out 9 batters, was named International Pitcher of the Week 2 weeks ago. And he's a left-hander. I think that's kind of the important thing here. So obviously after the Mets have 2 long-term relievers who are going down, I think that's kind of the role that you could see him in. He has been pitching out of the bullpen. He has a fastball in the mid-90s, a slider that's pretty good. And he's not afraid to challenge batters, throw in the strike zone. He's not going to walk a lot of batters. And I'll be honest, just for me, this is my personal preference. I'm drawn to those sorts of pitchers. He's fearless, unafraid is how I would describe him. And I just feel like with the Mets and the vibes they've been having, the games they've been playing, the mentality that they have, those are the kind of pitchers that you need. And I think he's someone who the Mets are interested in or could be interested in as a left-handed reliever out of the bullpen.
I love how we're connecting this well because I couldn't agree more. Especially after Minter and Young went down, there was no surprise that the Mets made the aggressive move that they did to see how one De La Cruz would look in a bulk setting as a starter. But then since then, he's had 2 relief outings. He didn't fare too well in his latest one. I know he gave up a couple runs, but the one before that, he did go at least 1.1 shutty and looked really good in doing so. And even though when you look at the stuff of Felipe De La Cruz, because I've talked with Isaac Rothman, who's my pitching contributor on the platform, he is just this very young, savvy mind that knows all about the analytics and the advanced numbers that make average fans like us be like, I'm sorry, what did you just say? But through his breakdown, he's went into getting into how much the velocity is carrying De La Cruz right now. Because the Mets, when you look at their lefty options, even with David Pearson to a degree, and then obviously their bullpen and Jesus Cabrera among others, they really don't have a lefty that can pump the gun the way that De La Cruz can so comfortably do. And that is what's more than likely going to pave him to the MLB level. So whether that happens relatively soon this season as a lefty reliever option with both Minter and Young out for the season, or if it's something that happens later on this year, maybe heading into next year, it really feels like that he's a guy that's going to continue to surprise some fans. And then when he gets the call, you're going to say, who's Felipe De La Cruz? But if you've been following the platform here, then you already know exactly who he is. So talking about the pitchers, that was a lot of fun. But now let's talk a little bit about the hitters. Are there anyone that have been notable to you in the Mets space? And if so, why?
I think you can't have this. I know that people would say this is the obvious answer. I just don't think you can have this conversation without at least bringing up Drew Gilbert. He has been slumping a little bit, but he also has had 18 straight games on base and counting. The broadcaster who I told you that I connect with from time to time told me that he has developed his patience at the plate, not expanding the zone, not chasing, also not getting hits as consistently as maybe you'd like to see from somebody like him, but he's drawing more walks. So to me, I see pros and I see cons to that sort of style right now. I almost would compare it, at least at this moment in time, to somebody like Alonso, where I feel like you're starting to see a lot of plate patience, for lack of a better term. Obviously Alonso has the power too. I think that's the kind of thing that Drew Gilbert is working on. If you looked at his stats, I don't know it off the top of my head, but I think he has hit, around 2 home runs, maybe 3 doubles this year. But, again, I think it's a matter of time until those things start to change. And I think long term, you will absolutely start to see that his power is there as well. I also think that at the AAA level, that's the right time to be developing things such as plate patience. When you think about the difference between AAA players and people who are able to not only make it in the major leagues, but stay there, I think consistency is probably one of the biggest factors, right? Like you think about Brett Baty and whatnot. You need people who are not just playing well one night, who are not playing well for 1 week. You need people who are playing well consistently. And I think patience is one of those traits that if you develop it, now you're maybe starting to see some more consistent at-bats.
Oh, absolutely. And it's been encouraging to see the upset Drew Gilbert has had this year coming back from that rehab because he initially started the year late spring training. Then he was in Port St. Lucie for a little bit. Then he worked his way up to now doing a solid job there in Syracuse, batting right around their top 3 there out of center field. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of him and seeing if he's given an opportunity at any point this season or if he's boxed out either because of, say, the consistency isn't necessarily there yet, or what I think is the most notable one is the fact that the Mets will just have an abundance of depth in their outfield as Jose Siri is quickly ramping up, and it appears that it won't be too long before he's actually out there starting rehab games, which is encouraging for Mets fans who like Jose Siri and everything he brings outside of just his bat-to-ball skills. But to wrap this one up, Samantha, let's have a fun discussion because I know, like you, I'm absolutely ecstatic and pumped up waiting for the Subway Series this weekend, and this Subway Series matchup is going to be an enticing one because when you look at the pitching matchups, you have Tyler McGill game 1, Griffin Canning game 2, and likely David Pearson game 3 barring changes. Now for the Yankees, I don't know their configuration at this point in time as they have yet to be posted, but it's going to be an interesting one to follow with a Yankees offense that of course has been the prototypical Bronx Bombers so far this year, led by the Mr. Captain himself and Aaron Judge for them. And for the Mets, they've had so many things clicking, But the one guy who still has fluctuated with getting in a consistent breakout is a man returning to his home from this past year, and Juan Soto. So I would love to hear your initial reactions and thoughts about this matchup.
It is funny because, every time that I'm thinking about the Subway Series, or even every time that I'm looking up a Mets win and I'm looking through the stats because I wasn't able to watch the game live, but I'm curious who did well. I'm looking at Juan Soto and I'm thinking, wow, this team is doing amazing despite the fact that he's really not producing a whole lot at all. I'm not saying, like, I know that over the course of however many years he is here for, he inevitably will be as advertised, but it would be a lie to say that the start for Soto has been, it's been pretty underwhelming is the word I would use. And of course, Yankees fans are going to let him know that in the outfield. I am sure of it. I think that this is going to be the kind of situation, honestly, where you see what kind of not only player, but person that Juan Soto is. This is not going to be an easy homecoming. It's the Yankees. There will be no, rounds of applause. Like you're going to expect what you would expect from a New York crowd. And honestly, if I was him, I would actually think in my head that boos are an insult. Like it means that you did something remarkable when you were there and people were upset to see you go. But will he be able to think about it that way? And will those kinds of outside factors that he can't control motivate him? Or will he slump because of them? I think that it will tell you a lot about the kind of person who he is. We know that the entire, rest of the Mets team will come to his rescue. I have no doubt that Lindor and all of those other guys will step up and build him up. But I'm just curious to see how he handles that pressure as an individual. Beyond that, whether he performs well or not, this is a big series. And I guess the term I would use is bragging rights, but even that feels like it's falling below the mark a little. There is something important that's going to come from this series, and if the Mets are able to pull it out and win this series, man, I think it's just the cherry on top. It's that cherry on top of we got Juan Soto, and it's that first step in the direction towards the Mets becoming New York's team. I need everybody to take a breath. I am not by any means saying that the Mets are New York's team. I understand the rich history of the New York Yankees. But something shifted when Juan Soto came to Queens. There's no denying that. It's really one of the first times in a long time, maybe ever, that the Mets really kind of won against the Yankees. So I don't know. To me, this series is almost that turning point of, anybody will get this, whoever had an older brother. I had two younger brothers, so I would know. It's like my older brother is always, making fun of the younger brother or just stronger than him, bigger than him. But at some point, if you're the younger brother, you grow up enough that you're able to fight against the older brother, and this could be that series that determines how much older has the younger brother gotten.
Yeah, and if we know anything about recent success between the Mets and the Yankees, it's been pretty lopsided. The Mets steamrolled the Yankees last year. It was uncontested between the two as to who the better team was in their head-to-head matchups. And the Mets have been favoring better than not over the past couple of years. And then you add in Juan Soto. And not only is the Juan Soto effect so exciting about this, but the greater door that it opens is not just on the perception of New York baseball going forward, which we all know would continue to be drastically different in how it impacts a game today for fan bases, with Yankees fans being upset about the fact that, their beloved player next to Judge is no longer with them. And for a lot of people, even hopping on the Mets bandwagon because of the fact that you're seeing the trend shift more into Flushing, Queens than what you otherwise get there with the Bronx Bombers and the Bronx. And the big thing that I look at in this matchup specifically is not just necessarily bragging rights, but more so the continuation of what this rivalry is supposed to be. Because there's a contingent of fans that say, listen, the Mets and Yanks are never going to be rivals because one's in the American League, one's in the National League. Then you have a contingent of fans, probably maybe more Mets and maybe some Yanks to a degree, saying that, oh, we despise each other. We truly do view this as a bloodbath of a rivalry. Wherever you stand in the aisle, I'm here to tell you that this Mets-Yankees rivalry is now going to be sparked like something that we really haven't probably seen, with the exception of 2021 when Giancarlo Stanton and Lindor were going back and forth and Lindor hit 3 home runs at Citi Field. Prior to that, you really can't think of too much, with the exception of what we saw there going all the way back to the Subway Series World Series. the same year I was born. So just to share some context, there really hasn't been much that's happened over the past couple decades between these two teams, and now it feels like it's finally the start of something special in New York baseball that grows this rivalry, that causes great chippiness. And I know for certain Juan Soto's not only going to get heckled the entire game and right field with the bleacher creatures, but he may even get things thrown at him. Like, he needs to be prepared for anything and everything. Mets fans attending, they need to be prepared that if you're rocking a Juan Soto jersey, you're an easy target. People are going to go and be aggressive. This is going to be nasty work. This is going to be like a playoff type atmosphere starting here in May. So I'm just prefacing this to anyone that's attending, buckle up, because this is going to be nuts. And as someone who will either be attending Friday's game or I'm going to be going to New York to do a watch party there, I can only imagine what that environment is going to be like in itself. So I can't wait. I know it's going to be exciting. And before we let you go, Samantha, let's get your series prediction. Who do you think is going to win? And who do you hope is going to be the standout from the Mets, whether it's a specific pitcher or a specific bat?
Wow. Maybe it is recency bias, but I really do think the Mets can pull this out. I think with the way they've been playing, I don't have any doubt that they can win this series. It's just a matter of if they will. And I would say, unsurprisingly, I really do think that Pete Alonso is going to continue to be the difference. And I will keep saying that until he is off of this hot streak. I just feel like pressure fears Pete at this point in the season. And he's somebody who, in the high pressure moments, it is continuing to come through. So I'd put my money on him to do the same thing now.
I love that pick with Pete. I'm going to go with a still an obvious one, but I'm gonna go with Francisco Lindor just because I feel like anytime that I need to doubt something as to who's gonna step up in the bigger moments, Lindor has been the most reliable over the past year and a half, 2 years now. So I'm gonna go with Frankie to see how he can do in this matchup. Juan Soto, I hope, trumps all these performances and really kind of steps on the throat of the Yanks, but I don't know what to expect there, so I'm not going to go out of my way to assume. I've already done that enough so far the first month and a half of the season, saying, okay, Juan Soto's going to get a 10-game hitting streak starting now. And then he has himself an over game. It is what it is, but I'm excited. I know you are too, Samantha. So again, thank you so much for coming on for our latest segment here on the platform. Please make sure to check out Samantha Croston. Again, all the great work that she does there as a local director there for Syracuse Sports, as well as a co-host of the Why My Mets Fan podcast. Samantha, any closing remarks before we get out of here?
No, I appreciate the shout out. And obviously, if anybody wants to check it out, we are available on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast at Why Mets Pod.
Awesome. Thank you guys again for watching. That's Samantha Croston. I'm your guy, Wardy, and we'll see you on the next one. Peace out, everybody.